Hey everyone, it's late here, but I wanted to do a video about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, and it just felt like the right time to talk about this. Um, it's abuse and the different types of abuse. Um, let's start with the simplest, which seemed to be harmless, but verbal abuse, emotional abuse. It's when people not just call names, put people down, put other people down. Um, you know, Words hurt. There's a quote that says, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words won't hurt me. Well, that's complete BS because words absolutely hurt us, and not just hurt us, but they um, actually sort of subconsciously um, damage us in a very deep way, where it ends up sort of becoming a belief system, which then ends up dictating the decisions we make, the choices we make, and the actions we take, and the results of that. And of course, our self-esteem is affected. Um, so words are very powerful, and when someone is verbally abusive to us, it is not acceptable. And it can happen in a simple friendship. It can happen in the context of a marriage. It can happen in the context of a any relationship, for that matter. I think words are powerful. I think we need to be really cognizant and mindful of the things that come out of our mouth when we speak to other people. We say, I hear parents sometimes say the most um, damaging things to their kids, and they don't realize. To them, it's like, haha, it's just my child's really little. It doesn't matter. It does matter. It does influence who they are. So, and it shapes who they become as adults. So that's verbal abuse. And again, like I said, it could be in the context of a relationship. It could be in the context of a friendship. Could be in the context of a um, parent. It could be in the context of, you know, family, friends, anything, a boss and an employee. Um, so that's verbal abuse, whether it's not always even name calling or cursing, it's just putting another person down. Um, and that usually results in emotional abuse, right? So emotional abuse is not always a separate thing of its own. Emotional abuse happens as a result of verbal abuse, usually, or physical abuse for that matter, right? But emotional abuse is also someone who plays mind games with you, someone who sort of, just tortures you, um, and puts you down in, passive aggressiveness is a very real thing, and that's one of those things where someone can be very passive aggressive, where they're kind of being nice, but they're not, because their intention is to put you down, and that's what your subconscious and that's what your soul picks up on. Um, and then let's talk about sexual abuse. So this is something that is, of course, um, and I've experienced all three: emotional abuse, um, verbal abuse, and sexual abuse. Let's also, before we get into sexual abuse, let's talk about physical abuse. Physical abuse is the actual physical hurting of another person. It could be a parent. Spanking is okay. It's the law defines spanking as acceptable, right? It's when you leave a mark on your child, that's not acceptable. But to me, physically spanking a child, I mean, I've raised kids. I've got a 16 and a 19-year-old. Yes, I whooped their butts when they were growing up. And now I have my brother's daughter who's three, almost four. And I see how she is, and there are times when we do want to whoop her butt, but we don't. And just as I've gotten older, I have a very different sense of my view on what spanking is, because spanking is I think it's degrading. Um, it's there. There's different schools of thoughts, and as you can tell, I'm still not completely comfortable with where I am on where I stand on spanking. I think um, part of me feels that if I was to, if I was a parent, my children were little, they're not anymore, but if I spanked their bottom, right, sort of spank their bottom, I think just to kind of shake them up and get their attention, that might be okay. But if I slap them across their face, that's not acceptable, because that to me is just degrading and disrespectful, right? Um, but again, physical abuse doesn't have to be where it physically breaks bones or burns. I mean, that's the extreme form of abuse, which is physical. And it absolutely damages and causes, emotional pain and trauma. But physical abuse is also just physically slapping, hitting, pushing, whatever the case might be. I think any of these things, there's an entire spectrum of um, anything that you talk about, whether it's the physical abuse, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, and of course, any depression, anxiety, anything. There's a whole spectrum of mild, to medium to severe, right, to unacceptable. I mean, any of this is unacceptable. So let's talk about sexual abuse. Sexual abuse can be as something as little as someone being molested, touched inappropriately in a sexual manner with the intention of it being sexual, or it can be someone who's actually raped. Physical penetration, sexual penetration. Sexual abuse can be, and it both girls and boys have been victims of sexual abuse. The research shows that more more boys have been victims of sexual abuse, um, that are now coming forward, that unfortunately don't come forward early on, just because of the stigma and how boys are raised versus how girls are raised. Girls don't come forward either, but I think it's sexual abuse is one of those things that absolutely, I think it's, unfortunately, it's prevalent in our society, and in all societies, in all parts of the world. I don't think, just like domestic violence, I don't think sexual abuse or any of these kinds of abuse is limited to a certain group of people. It's not limited to poor, socioeconomically poor people, or it's not limited to a certain race of people. Sexual abuse is, anybody could be sexually molested. So I've shared this before, and I'll share it again, and I'll tell you, what I'm about to share is very personal, and so if you're not comfortable, turn it off, don't watch anymore. This has taken me 44 years to share. I wrote about this a few years ago and shared it for maybe a minute on my blog, and I pulled the post down because it's so personal. So, as you might or might not be aware, I have been a victim of sexual abuse, along with, unfortunately, quite a few people that I know in my life, that have crossed my path. Um, my first perpetrator was 2 years old. Sorry, when I was 2 years old, and the last time that it happened, I was 12. I was, I guess, blessed where I was never raped, but I was sexually molested. I was touched inappropriately. It was inappropriate kissing. I mean, I was a 2-year-old baby, for crying out loud. And I have memories of this grown man who used to be a caretaker. He was a worker, that was there to watch my brother and me. I must have been actually probably 3, I think, at the time, now that I think about it, because my brother was just a baby at the time. Um, and it started with that. And it just went on with, a teenage neighbor, to other male caretakers, to, a male cousin of mine, you know, um, and I never talked about it. I never said anything to anyone, because I knew deep down it was wrong, and I knew deep down it was dirty, and it felt wrong. But what happens is, when we're sexually touched, we are wired physically to feel certain sensations. And so we tend to, our body responds even though we are emotionally we don't want to. And it's more evident for boys because they actually get an erection. Girls, you can't really tell, except, we emotionally might carry the guilt of, oh my God, I actually enjoyed the sensation, although it felt wrong and it felt dirty and it made me feel yucky. And it's very confusing for victims of sexual abuse because, again, your body responds because it's wired to respond to sensations. And so I never told because I just carried guilt about it. And again, no blame. And I've worked, I've processed it in my own way. And I've been really blessed because I'm grateful for the experience of having gone through that because of that and because of my ability to have processed and worked on it on my own through the different forms of therapy modalities that I trained in, I'm now able to actually work very effectively with other victims and survivors of sexual abuse through neurolinguistic programming, through hypnotherapy, through theta healing. So I don't regret any of it. I don't regret anything that I've experienced in my life just because for me, everything that I've experienced in my life, excuse me, has informed who I am and has contributed to who I am and has helped shape who I am. And I love who I am. I love every ounce of every inch of me. And I say that with the utmost humility. I'm very grateful for who I am as a person and the powerful soul that I am. Not in any worldly power, but just the inner knowing of who I am. Thank God, Shukar Mola for that. And I've had, the last time I came forward and I shared my story with some girlfriends and some random sort of people, it was so amazing to me to hear women coming literally out of the woodwork and sharing their stories with me, saying, me too. And this whole notion that started, I think it was a month or so ago, the Me Too hashtag Me Too movement that started, which is so sad that we need a movement to talk about this, but it is what it is. It was my coworkers were coming forward, that they'd never talked about being sexually molested. Actually, I have several women who were raped by their biological fathers or their stepfathers or, a neighbor or an uncle or whoever, coaches. And it's they survived. They survived, and these are women that are now powerful women who are in the helping field, who work with me side by side, and they do good work, But I also know, unfortunately, many other women who weren't so lucky in terms of being able to forgive and move on. I know many women who, because of their sexual abuse, are now suffering from severe anxiety, severe depression, are on medication, have been in therapy, have bipolar. It's traumatized them to the degree where it's shifted, how their mental health works. And so, I think this whole sort of culture of silence and shame that we have, it really needs to stop, number one. Does that mean you go and announce it to the world that you've been abused? No, that's not what I'm saying. But it shouldn't be something you hide either, right? It should be something you're getting help about. Go find a therapist. Go find someone that does good work, that specializes in working with sexual abuse. It is not your fault. It's time to take the shame away from it. Brene Brown talked about, shame. If you put shame in a petri dish and you douse it with, secrecy and something else, it grows exponentially. But if you talk about it and if you openly discuss it, then shame cannot grow and shame cannot multiply. It just dissipates. And the other reason I think it's so important is because, we have a whole generation of kids that are being born all the time. And I think as adults, it's our responsibility to protect them. I work again extensively. I used to work on the psychiatric unit of a hospital. I've started a new position working in a children's ER. And, I see children that are brought to the ER, or children that are brought to my office for individual sessions who have been, there's suspicion of sexual molestation or abuse, or there's rape, and, I have to urge, parents, caregivers, to please be cognizant of who is watching your child. Do not leave your kids alone with someone you don't know perfectly well. Unfortunately, some of us don't have the family support. I know my ex-husband and I, when we were together, we didn't have family around, and so, we because of our history of sexual abuse, we didn't leave our kids alone with anyone because we just didn't trust our kids to be with anyone else. So I think it's important that, we be very careful about, who we leave our kids with, because research shows, statistics show that, most sexual abuse that is done by a trusted member of either the family or a trusted or someone, an adult that the family was close to, or someone in a power of authority like a teacher or a coach. So there have been, it is not the end of the world. It is a big deal, but it's not the end of the world. Oprah Winfrey was sexually molested and raped as a child, as a kid. She ended up actually being pregnant and lost the baby. She, Maya Angelou, another one, another dynamic woman who, was raped as a child, was sexually molested, and she actually ended up delivering her son, who is her son now. Maya Angelou passed away, unfortunately, but it's sexual abuse is more prominent and more common than we realize and that we want to know. And so I think, yeah, it happens, but the idea is, let's try to change that. Let's start taking care of our loved ones, and let's believe them when someone comes forward, right? Um, I don't know what else to say about this. I think I'm done for now. Um, if there are any questions, please feel free to inbox me. Um, there are therapy approaches that are very effective in terms of being able to minimize, release, replace the trauma of sexual abuse, or any kind of abuse for that matter. Because what happens is, when someone goes through abuse, they tend to um, replay a video of what they experienced, or they tend to sort of, hear the words, if it's verbal abuse and emotional abuse, excuse me. And neurolinguistic programming, and I'm sure there are other modes that I'm not aware of,